Are you a leader in customer success, pre-sales, professional services, support? Do you work behind the scenes and roll up your sleeves to make sure that customers are happy? Renew. Then this is for you. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Getting it done. Services, success, and software. We'll talk with the pros that have been in the trenches, getting service teams off the ground, launching new types of groups to service customers, or running agencies that don't have a product attached to it. For the pros, by the pros. This is the GSD Podcast, and this is your host, Jeff Kushmerek.
All right, it's Jeff Kushmerek here. So very excited to bring the latest episode to you. This is with Mark Holland. So anybody who knows me, they were probably like, when's Mark Holland going to be on the podcast? So Mark was my boss, and then we worked together at Brightcove, and just been one of my mentors all along this path here. And he's been at just a remarkable number of places that have had fantastic exits from. We had Endeca and then Brightcove and Applause, and now he's at Toast, helping them scale internally with a lot of the things that we learned along the way that we talked about in this episode. So I was just went back and listened to it, and we went through just so many topics, from growing understaffed groups to growing 2x in 6 months, and how to structure and set up the best way to interview people when you have to hire 2x as many people. Also, how did he set up his organization to have 400,000 crowdsourced independent contractors? We just hit the gamut of things, but also we went into some of the deep metrics. We talked about margin a lot and fixed proposals and how to make those successful as well too. So hope you enjoy. Mark's awesome, and really happy to bring this out. All right, I'm here with Mark Holland, longtime friend, boss, coworker,
subordinate.
Subordinate. I didn't want to say that, but. So I'm so glad you got on this. I know we've had some scheduling issues, but this is the one I've been wanting to have for a while, because I wanted to get in depth on some ops. And I always remember, just for people listening, Mark was the guy who sort of exposed me to all of the math that goes into professional services. Before I worked with Mark, I was like, oh, I'm going to go over here, I'm going to manage this project, and then I'm going to go over here. And then you started mentoring, and you were like, so there's 20,080 hours in a way. You just started working.
Yeah, that math thing tends to work out pretty well, actually, when you start.
Exactly. So before we get into a little bit of history, I was going to start into this when we weren't recording, but I'd just love to hear what you're doing now over at Toast, which is the other massive Endeca unicorn that's going on now. So.
Yeah, sure. So I am still working on the title, but I'm a VP of CS Excellence. Oh. So I have 3 functions that I'm responsible for. One is the education side of things, so not only training our customers, but also internal education, separate from our whole learning and development team, which we have a pretty large one there. As you and I were talking before we got started, is that we have a new start class today at Toast of something like 110 people in the last month, right? Which is just mind-boggling. So we have a whole group of folks that are focused on getting them up and running. But I also have what we call enablement, which is for customer success. Our customer success team is about 500 people, and we're looking to grow to about 750 by the end of the year.
Wow.
It's the scale is really impressive.
And if people are looking at Toast and they want to know why, and there's a lot of local markets, right? It's enabling. Actually, I don't want to take too much, because my vision of the company is 2 years old. So
sure, yeah. So just to finish my responsibilities, I have an enablement function. So we need to hire about 250 more people into CS. We need to make sure that they're up and running and functioning and productive as quickly as possible. And then the third one I have is what we call CS Strategic Operations. And that's, there's twofold pieces of that. One is to act as sort of the product manager relating to the business systems team internally as we try to get, Salesforce and other tool sets up and running. as well as the data analytics side where all that math lives. So,
yes.
So those are the three functions that I have. So it's an internal support role for the CS team. It's run by Emmanuel Scala, who is one of the Endeca alums. So she's the SVP of CS, and given the scale and everything that we have to do, the role that I'm coming into, which wasn't here before, decided to put it together to make sure that we as a company, as we have goals to scale to 2,300 by the end of the year and continue to double in revenue for the next 5 years, that we have somebody who can help drive that forward.
So, I mean, it makes sense because if you remember over adult beverages, we were talking and then she was like, "I mean, like a chief of ops person or something." And I'm like, I know who your guy is. That's awesome.
So, Toast is unique in certainly in my experience because it basically focuses almost completely on SMB. And so, as you know, throughout my career, I spent a lot of time on the enterprise side. In fact, came into Applause to build out that enterprise practice. And so what we do is we sell to individual restaurants, and we do have an enterprise restaurant focus for some of the larger accounts. Jamba Juice is one of our biggest customers. But in the end, we sell to mom and pop and 1 and 2 and 3 restaurant kind of customers. And so we have about 17,000 of them, and we're looking to, that only represents about 3.5% of the overall U.S. market for restaurants. So there's a lot of market acquisition focus here in terms of trying to drive a lot more restaurants into the pipeline and become Toast customers. And so the CS team, one of the reasons why we're as big as we are is because the other unique thing about Toast is that we sell both hardware and software. And so, the devices that we have on the floor, we have to get them installed. We have to wire them. We have to set up Wi-Fi access points. So our biggest team is the services team, and they have a large responsibility around getting the physical location set up and running, because as soon as they go live, that's when we start generating revenue.
Yep. No, I remember that. I was in there like 2 years ago and talking, and you're basically walking up to a barista and asking her to set up like an Android operating system. At the time, it was like, and then maybe set up your own access points and all that. So that's.
It's a bit more full service and certainly a lot more mature. 2 years later. It's definitely a different shift for me, but it's very cool.
Oh, great! It's great. So I know it may be funny, switching into some other subjects after that, but you did have a deep professional services background, and I wanted to touch into a little bit of that. And you know what? I'm going to switch off video because there seems to be a little bit of latency, just so I don't want to.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's just for us to see each other, but we've certainly seen plenty of each other over the years. So my background, well, I always knew you were at Accenture, right? And that's where you learned like a lot of these professional services chops. Do you come straight out of school and go into management consulting, or just help me out with that?
Sure. Yeah. No, I graduated a while ago, and at the time the economy was not the most open to unmotivated college students, which I was as a senior. So I didn't do a lot of preliminary job search before I graduated. And then, so I'm sitting there in the summertime going, well, maybe I should find a job. And actually the first job I went to work for my fraternity, the college fraternity, the national organization based in Pennsylvania. I was going to do that as a sort of quick 6 month, 1 year stint and get out into the real world, and ended up getting promoted into what we call the director of chapter services role. And I learned more about liability and leadership in a couple, 3-4 years than I ever had, because one of my main jobs was to go around and tell a bunch of college students that they couldn't have kegs anymore because it was too dangerous. So I learned a lot about conflict management and some of those other things. So I did that for about 4 years, and I moved back to Boston, and then I started Accenture about 6 or 9 months after I moved back to Boston. I'm from here originally. So did that for about 2 years. It was, the classic road warrior. I was down in lovely Woonsocket, Rhode Island, working for CVS, and we were putting in 3 major systems for them. I was the business intelligence developer, so I worked with MicroStrategy and built, probably one of the first reasonably large commercial data warehouses.
I think it's still running, actually.
I don't know. They kicked us out after a couple of years, so I wasn't there anymore. But ours was the more successful of the 3. There was a whole strategy thing around promos and another one around pricing. So, it is what it is. Those kind of projects are big and unwieldy. But I decided that it was time to move back to Boston permanently when one of my good friends asked me if I still live there. So I was living in Cleveland 5 days a week working for Bridgestone Firestone. And at that point, I'm like, well, if my friends don't think I still live here, it's time for me to come back to Boston. So I went over to Epsilon up in Burlington and did a bunch of business intelligence development there in Cognos and business objects. And then from there started my high growth venture backed companies I went to a company called the ePrize over in Framingham, which was a role-based content management company. We went public in 2001, right before the tech crash. So good that we had money in the bank, bad that the market went down the toilet. So, and then went over, there was a bunch of different things we got bought, but then went over to Endeca where we met you. And had a great run there. A lot of fun. 3.5 years, did a bunch of different things around North America. What we call consulting. Well, we changed it, didn't we? We went from customer solutions to consulting.
It was professional services. I remembered consulting in the end because of some interesting meetings that we were.
Yeah, I think I still have a vest that says consulting on it, right?
So, you're right. I probably have. Yes, I have the same one somewhere. Yeah, that's right. Actually,
so that was an awesome run, but yeah, good.
And then we're at Brightcove, but actually, I love talking about that little group that we're a part of for a year. And this might get into the ops conversation a little bit more, but when I tell people about what you were able to sort of pull together in the team and what we did for sort of scaling the group out, people are like, I can't believe that you guys were allowed to do that, as in a good thing. Like, not many people.
Yeah.
So I would love for get into the genesis of that and sort of what our mandate was, and sort of what we were able to kind of accomplish in a year there.
Sure. Yeah. So we had a transition in leadership, went from Diane to Mark Riggs, and throughout that, Mark wanted to run the actual business that I had been shepherding in between the transition, and we talked about a good opportunity as we grew to build an internal function that would allow us to scale, right? Because we were part of what we worked through before Riggs got there was working with Papa. Steve Papa, the CEO, he helped us realize that we were drastically understaffed for what we need to accomplish, both currently and in the future. And I think I still have a slide somewhere where we basically overlaid a 10% uplift on everything that we were doing because we needed that many more people. And so in support of that, knowing that we're going to need to grow rather large, right? I mean, I think we were probably 40 or 45 and had to grow to 100 or 120 in something like 6 months. We needed to put a bunch of stuff into place, everything from career ladders to, the work that you did in terms of, you were one of the first people to put Agile in place, right? In terms of how we went and delivered things back in, 10 years ago plus. We also had Nile with the partner piece. And that was a big component, right? Because our solution was so technical, we had to be able to enable these partners to go out and be successful because we just, didn't have the capacity. And then there's the various infrastructure. So everything from standardized on pay scale to, career ladders and hiring. So hiring, I think, what you and I talked about this is a really interesting, thing that worked out tremendously well in retrospect. But one of the things we were starting to see, because it was such a high velocity, we had so many people to go through, we'd set up these two time a week things where we're actually going through real physical resumes.
Pizza party, still resumes. That's right.
Exactly. Yep. And so we started to get people, we were a story company certainly at the time, and people wanted to come work for us, but we started to get people to reject us. And so, we did a smart thing, which is actually go talk to them and ask them why it is that, they weren't coming on board. And the theme that started to show up, which was, I felt like the process was a little disorganized, and I felt like everybody was asking me the same questions. And I didn't get a good sense of, of what it was like to work here, right? It just depended on the people. And so I remember from, our perspective in terms of, being there going to interview, everybody's so busy that, you'd literally say, oh, here, I'm reading the resume walking into the room, or I'm reading it sitting down across from the candidate, right? Not a great experience for them. Obviously not prepared, but, everything's going a million miles a minute. So we got together, a few of us internally, and just, said, how could we improve this process? And so, the end result was we created a persona-based interviewing process. And we also, the other thing that they complained about was that it was taking too long to get an offer. So we set the goals. We want to be able to turn around and offer that day, if it all worked out well. Wasn't always, able to do so, but that was the goal.
It's either an offer or a walk to the elevator early, right?
Yeah. Well, we can get to that part too. So what we did is we said, okay, listen, for the role, we want to have two peers, two people doing that job currently, talk to them.
Yep.
And we had, project managers and technical resources. So we'd have somebody who is the complement, right? So if you're interviewing for a PM job, you talk to two project managers and one of the technical folks. And then the hiring manager was the last person. Mm-hmm. And so in order to prevent that people asking all the same questions, we prepared a set of behavioral interview questions for each persona. And so what we did was we said, persona one is going to look at this aspect of the candidate in terms of whether it's culture fit or skill set or what have you. And the other thing we felt we needed to do was sell the culture, right? Because we thought it was something that was really powerful. To this day, people still talk about how great it was. So going in and being able to say, hey, listen, I want you to sell on, I can't of course remember the values at the moment, but I want you to sell on, whatever particular culture value was. Mm-hmm. And what we did was that each of those personas do different things, right? Yep. So collectively, we'd get the whole view of the candidate, and they'd get a good view of what Endeca represented. So the other thing that you alluded to, which I thought was pretty important, because we were so busy and so much going on, and we had such a huge amount of throughput, that we wanted to give everybody the ability to basically call the ball and say, hey, listen, this person is not going to work, and let them know, right? And so. I think we didn't do that terribly often, maybe 5 or 10% of the candidates. But,
twice,
if somebody walks in and they haven't done any research on us and they don't know anything about us, chances are, if they're not going to do that, they're not going to do that when they go to talk to a customer. Right. And that's bad news for everybody. Yep. So, but I think that was great for the folks doing the interviews, because one, it really limited their prep time, right? They were able to walk. We handed folders to people and said, you're persona 3, and here's the list of questions
you're
you can
the
ask.
Culture guy.
Yeah, exactly. Here's the culture one that you need to look at. And, I think it worked out well. And it, it showed, I think, in the results, our goal was to hire 40 people into professional services and consulting in 6 months. And we hired 32. And we had no duds. Like that was probably the most impressive thing on the back end, which was looking at the quality of folks that we hired. It was really high. So
yeah, absolutely. And
overall, I think it was really successful.
And we were fighting up against, Google, Microsoft. Like we're dealing with a lot of MIT grads, people who had a lot of people wanting to hire them and everything. So that was pretty amazing.
Yep. Yeah, it was a very competitive environment then, no doubt. Yep.
Yeah. So then we had Brightcove and then Applause. But I sort of, instead of, I know we spent some time walking through a couple of those jobs already. I had a couple things that sort of concepts that we were discussing beforehand on the Google Doc. And one of them, maybe this is a good way to talk about Brightcove, and we can bring it in with the points that you just brought up. I use the term on an island when you're on a service team. And you're like, well, what do you mean? Yep. I said, well, I felt we were pretty standalone at Brightcove. Like we were our own organization, and we even had our own like technology infrastructure and everything, versus the sort of, very different situation with Endeca. And you just kind of summarized it up a lot better than I could. So just some views of we've got sales, we've got very coupled organizations with sales and marketing and the finance teams and engineering teams, and just sort of what your perspective was seeing that at Endeca, which was very much a perpetual license, stick it on a server, versus Brightcove, which was a SaaS-based thing, and then your Applause situation.
Yep. So I think a lot depends on the overall solution that you're selling, right? Mm-hmm. Because invariably, there's not a lot of true SaaS out there where, you're just buying software and never touch the thing again.
Right.
So, at Endeca, you're right, it was perpetual. So it's a little bit, not perfectly apples to apples, but I remember very clearly, sales part of it had to do with their comp, but sales, tried to minimize as much of the of the professional services component of it. But in the end, the right mix was about 2 to 1, right? So software was, 2/3 of the overall deal, and services was about 1/3, right? And that's pretty high, right? So it was a super complex solution. In some cases, obviously the ratio shifted. But that it is what it is, right? I think there were times where over-indexed and sales team certainly under-indexed on a few things. But we had tremendous success in doing so. But it was a very technical, complex solution. Yeah. Whereas Brightcove, it was very complex on the back end, but it was much more true SaaS than anything. Yeah. And the themes, I think our team we were a public company in 2012. I think our service team was only 21 or 22 people, right? And we were doing things like player customizations and video portals and things like that.
Well, let me just put an asterisk on that, in that we weren't allowed to hire. We had to pass a lot of revenue along because you don't want to distort the balance of your revenue streams.
The optics. You can't have the optics.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Well, because you'll look like a really big, complex, needs tons of professional services, which it really wasn't. We were just really good at building these experiences, and the Brightcove aspect was like, oh, okay, we're just going to drop this code in here, and then we're going to build up the rest of this stuff. But because
to engineering team's credit too, they did a pretty good job of getting it to the point where customers could adopt it with very little help from us, right? Yeah. So I think it was much more along the along the sort of SaaS promise in terms of the model and the ability to do
it.
And there are certainly, if you want to do something completely crazy, you want to fly in things from the side so you can buy it in the middle of a catwalk, right?
Yep.
We did that, right? Yeah. So it makes sense. You probably can't figure that out on your own, but we as the experts in the organization were there. But it was, like you said, much smaller, and I think you're right. We were almost more responsible for our own revenue than anything else, where in Endeca we were sold as a package, right? Yeah. And then at Applause, it's sort of it's almost completely different. It is a SaaS platform. I joke it was services as software rather than software as services. But in the end, what we were doing is crowdsourced testing, and that's a very unique kind of thing. And so there are a huge number of dynamics, especially on the people side, with testers around the world. We had 400,000 people around the world who are independent contractors that helped us deliver the testing results for our customers. Everything from incentive models to cultural differences. There's a huge component to managing that crowd, incentive models, in a way that these people aren't on salary. If I need them to do something, I can't say be in your seat and do it. Right. I have to find incentives for them to do it, and it's not always money, but it's often money. So we as a team really sort of built that muscle memory and the ability to handle different situations. And it really didn't lend itself to a self-serve model. And in fact, we had lots of conversations internally at Applause around self-service. And, one of the things I got back, or the one of the things I heard from being, on the front lines, was that almost never did anybody say, oh, I really wish I could do it myself. There were certainly a handful of 20 or 30 guys that, were QA folks in an emerging market kind of, startup under 25 kind of thing who needed to maintain the control. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, everybody was perfectly happy turning it over to us. They deliver their requirements to us, and then we'll go and execute for them and deliver the results. So that's what a lot of people want, especially if you're a QA manager or QA director, under the gun with not enough resources. You're happy to get stuff off your plate and hand it off to somebody else as long as the results come back the way you want them to.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating model too, especially I'm sure it wasn't the easiest to sleep at sometimes when they're not your employees, but yet you need to deliver like a company expects an enterprise solution to deliver on.
Yeah, I mean so one of there's a whole lot of interesting sides on the model, but we'd sell unlimited testing. Yeah. And when I walked in the door, I was like, this seems to be a pretty big business risk. And talking to the CEO is like, no, it really hasn't proven out to be. And they're for a bunch of reasons, a lot of which is, enterprise customers don't have a ton of velocity typically in terms of delivering new applications and websites. So there's this sort of process pause in each of these large accounts. So there's not like they're gonna.
So it's like a nice big yellow sticker, right? Also with free, but nobody uses it.
Right, exactly. I'll tell you, there were two customers that did break the model. You're my favorite from Brightcove, Viacom. So
oh my God! I just got more gray.
Yeah, I was gonna say, did you just shiver there?
Did you know my hotel? I just was in New York City. My hotel was right next door to the Viacom offices.
Oh God, yeah. That was that's quite an entertaining customer. So those guys broke us, but it was only a month-long project. Yeah. And then one other customer, and basically, all they wanted to do was, no matter what, they always wanted to do a full regression test across a pretty complex, large internal facing system. Yeah. And they literally had 3,000 bugs in the back. And we'd like, listen, we know about these bugs, we don't want to report them, because whenever a tester would find a bug, we have to pay them on it. And they're like, no, we want to see every single bug. And so when we asked them, they said, well, because we want to see if anything changed. But it had nothing to do with things that they were trying to change. They just wanted to see if something changed because of random code update they did. So that was the other customer. So we decided to part our ways. But for the most part, it's a very, the company's doing great. It got bought by Vista Partners about a year and a half ago for a nice sum of money, and they continue to excel in doing some really cool stuff that is an interesting model and company.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, they obviously found a good niche, because before that, I remember I was using like this random 5-person shop in San Fran before they came along. So
yeah. I think a couple of things happened really interesting there. One is they started in 2008, and that was when the markets were in the toilet and things were not going well. So what do companies do? They start to cut QA, right? Yeah. So they're able to step into the gap there. And then the smartphone ubiquity is really what made a massive difference for the company, because sure, you could be able to test the website by yourself in your lab, no problem. But what about just the Android fracturing alone between all the devices and all the different operating systems? At one point we were showing a slide, I think in 2012 or 13, that had something like 1,200 different Android intersections of Android OS versions and devices, and it's probably it's geometrically more complex at this point. So the nice thing there is that we have all these people with these devices around the world. You can test them what we call in the wild, that just no corporation could ever figure out how to do, just because it's just the scale of it was massive.
That's great. Hey, so I'm going to switch gears. I'll just try and do something. Let's see if I can bring two concepts together. It might not work, but let's see if we can do it. I've got a graph in my mind, right, of concepts. On one graph, we have sort of the standards as how you run, basically like your operating metrics for a professional services organization, right? So I think we all know what those are. However, you brought up an interesting concept that I'd love to be like the other axis on the graph, which is maturity of the organization. Right? Because you do a lot of stuff when you're closer to the corner than when you start sort of going up into the right.
Yep. I think. Yeah. So the various companies that I've been part of in terms of high growth, I've been employee about 75 to 125. Toast is a totally different animal, but helped grow it to 300 to 500, and we had our exits. And I think right, in the various times we went from, at Brightcove, for example, not worrying about the cost of the team in terms of delivering for the professional services side of things, to worrying about it, right? Yeah. And so starting to pay attention to those kind of metrics and putting in a resourcing tool and things like that. I think as companies evolve, right, especially at the, call it the 100-person level, even 150, it's kind of do what it takes, right? In the end, it's clearly accepted that the professional services organization is a cost center. The goal is to really, often fill the gaps for where product isn't, also where the customers are pushing it, right? So getting out on the bleeding edge of things. So in the end, you value things like creativity and creative problem solving and the true GSD, right? To get you an approach.
Absolutely.
And nobody cares, right? Because, at this point, you're not that big. Sure, you're a cost center, but the whole idea is to drive, a level of software adoption or SaaS adoption, because that's where the revenue comes from. As, however, time goes on, people start, looking, that cost center starts to get bigger. And of course, once it starts to get bigger, then the finance team starts looking at it and says, well, how can we reduce these costs? Because, we're either driving towards an IPO or some sort of other kind of liquidity event. And so we need to be able to, to your point, you alluded to it earlier, which is, hey, listen, we need to look less like a services company and more like a SaaS company, because there are those commonly accepted, percentage metrics that says, services should never be more than X percent of the overall headcount, because otherwise it's, it's not the promise of SaaS, right?
Right.
So moving through that, then, the first thing, it's funny, when I went into Applause, I started talking about margin day one, because I knew at some point we'd get there, and I wanted to start getting it into people's heads. And I think it's also a good, probably the best metric to look at as a leader.
At the end of the day, right? Did this project cost us? Are we paying the customer to do it, or
right? And so looking at margin, just started to build that in to the mentality, but of the teams, just so they knew it was, and it was a good gauge too. You could, as a way to evaluate the team and their ability to deliver effectively. If you look at that in context with NPS, do you have folks that are driving good NPS and high margins? Those are the people that you want to hang your hat on. And so
Absolutely.
Those that aren't doing those, either sacrificing one for the other, there's learning opportunities there. So I do think it shifts. And then, at Applause, when I was, I just left, and the focus really now is, and this is part of the private equity playbook, is they bought Applause, and they want to make it more efficient so they can turn around and sell it to somebody else in 3 to 5 years, right? So there's a lot of EBITDA focus and all that. So the cost component, the margin component of our projects is, very much at the forefront of everybody's perspective, right? So, on my way out, we were talking about ways to improve margin, which are very high for what we're doing. Another 4 full points, right? Across a $100 million business, that's not insubstantial, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. But that's, the journey when I got there was nobody even used the term margin, right? And we just did it, right? And over 6 years, we go from 17 million to 101. And, now all of a sudden margins are, the end all, the be all. So the maturity definitely does change things, and the makeup of the teams too.
Yeah, it's funny because I have them all listed out in front of me, right? But they all roll up to margin, right? They're all factors that go into it, right? Project overrun, billable utilization, annual revenue per employee and per billable consultant. Those just become lower when your margins go down.
Yeah, I think if you look at the billable utilization thing, always kind of drove me nuts, probably because 2 years of having it beaten in my head at Accenture. But that's an individual productivity measure, right? And when collectively as a team, you're going to build in, the question is how much output are you getting for your cost?
Right.
And your cost is relatively fixed. So that's what that's trying to address. It's just, not my favorite one. And I remember somebody in Endeca that you and I both know, who we had it into the bonus piece, and he maximized on that particular piece of it, to make sure he got paid. And I'm not going to blame him, right? That's how the incentive structure is set up. So yeah, I mean, it is what it is, but it's not a great one. But you're right. I think everything does lead back to margin, because in the end, that's what people are going to look at. When you look at companies reporting, in the public markets, there's always margin on the service side every single time, right? Because that is a good gauge of the health of the business.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and all the different factors you can play with. But just really talking about it, getting into it, is that margin aspect of things. What you said the Accenture thing. What was your expected percentage? Were you like the 90% clip or higher?
How about 200%?
Are you kidding?
So it wasn't expected, but it depended on what project you were. But we were working 80-hour weeks there. Yeah, I know. It's great to be 25 again.
Yeah.
Working 80-hour weeks. The joke was we'd spend 40 hours coding things, and then the next 40 hours fixing the bugs from last week, because we were so tired working the last 80-hour week. But yeah, so the targets there were 100%, at least. And they weren't going to ding you if you're under it, but they managed it very aggressively. And every hour that you spent, they were making, especially for folks that were entry folks like us, they're making, probably charged out at $150 an hour, and not paying us anywhere close to that. So they wanted to maximize that. Again, it's a good model, right? They're worth literally billions and billions of dollars in doing so. And the customers often get a lot of value from them. There's ones that don't, like that Hertz debacle, but take the good with the bad. And
that Hertz one's interesting. I think I told the last president I wanted to do like a panel on that one, because I do feel like when you get that much into the whole, like the customer's got to have some sort of like, it's not all, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah. I mean, come on. Now, I think Accenture probably, based on, and it's just an article, so who knows what really happened.
Well, there's a couple now that are up, but yeah.
Are there? Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that Accenture could have, handled it a little bit differently, but whatever. They also, there is a method to their madness, right?
If you do totally want to get deep into it, like if you go back to that article, all the gold is in the comments, because I think there's people. Do you remember? Well, there was a certain article that came out and then just became like the place where everybody talked about a certain company we're at. Like that's what I feel like what that article turned into. So what could he be talking about? Yeah. So didn't want to take that one too off the bat. So now I don't feel so bad about like a 70% utilization number at Brightcove. Like, hey guys, can you just do 7%? Like, and then because you get admin time, you have company meeting times, and then I'm trying to think of some of the other activities that we would do. Right, we would be part of like, hey, like Brandon's on the advertising scrum team because we're the experts in implementing advertising, right? So we can, So this is that what a massive change. We have about I think like 85% here, but we are very low for the people who are billable to we're just not a meeting heavy type of company. So that it all works out. People are like, oh my God, 85%. So yeah.
Again, it's a lot depends on what you're trying to drive, right? At Cove, I think we were just more than anything just trying to build the muscle. Hey, listen, how do we move away from being a larger cost center to a smaller one, right? Yeah. And so I think that, 70% is, I don't know if it's humane, but it's, it's achievable. Yeah. And at a place like Toast, I don't know if you could get anywhere close to something like that because of the number of meetings that we have. So it depends, right? I'm in a lot of meetings that, individual contributors wouldn't be, but regardless, there's, again, I don't love that metric much at all, but it is a good gauge of individual productivity, but also it can be gamed. That's one of the reasons why I don't like it so much.
And I do feel like when you get pulled into a fixed situation, like, hey, we want you to come here and fix our professional service company, like that's one of the ones that just like, we need to get over this number. And so you have to reverse engineer and find out all the things that are broken along the way to kind of get there. But
and I don't know how much fixed fee stuff you do, but if you get good, I think you and I did get good at doing fixed fee proposals. If you can get away from that hourly bill stuff, then that the pressure on the billable hourly utilization piece at least gets reduced because you've done a decent job of scoping what it looks like, and there's literally no incentive to overbill. Like the other reason why I don't like straight line bill stuff is because the incentive is always to go over, right? Because you're charging by the hour. So,
well, it's interesting for us. Well, so, my preference is always to do that. Like, here's your reference implementation, and then we're going to go redo like the pages situation, right? Like, here's a package, we'll slap a logo on it. And, it might've cost us $70K the first time to do it internally, but we're just going to bang it out for $40K, 100 more times and get high rep. Like that's great. That's great.
Yeah. We did that a couple times. Do you remember what we referred to him or what Sonder used to refer to him as?
No, but I should ask him. He's right around the corner from me.
Right on. We need to go build a toaster, right?
That's right.
We need to build a toaster. I need to make toast. I need to put stuff in and have toast come out, which I find ironic now that I'm at a place called Toast.
Yes. Oh my God, that's crazy. Wow, it's great memory on that one. Oh my God.
Yeah, no, that we did that both at Endeca and at Brightcove, right? I think if you want to, that's absolutely one way to drive better margins is to, especially when the customers are asking for it, is to go out and build, sort of call it a predefined solution like we did with the video portal. Allow them to customize certain things and include that either in the price or they can you can upcharge them for those customizations. But in the end, they get good value, they get much better speed, and we get good things out of it too. So I absolutely think that's a great way to go about it.
It was always great because we actually had 3 of the pages in the sales stuff, right, where we had, here's your thing, you're going to stick a logo on here, and I'm like, this is great, right? But if you're talking to the really big media properties and everything, you're like, come on, you want to be better.
Yeah, but that's not what we were building it for, right? Right. If you want a totally custom solution, great. let's talk, right? We're happy to do that too.
Well, exactly. And then you want to get your teams working on those types of things, right? Like I'd rather have like Jesse and those guys at the time working on these really great, fantastic experiences, and then have these like either newer employees or partners, just to get that signal to noise ratio outside of the organization, so your group can really work on these things. So it's like, hey, people need Brightcove, they need a portal or Endeca or whatever. Here's something that you can basically load the data in and slap a logo on and you're good to go. So these guys are going to go do it for you, and we're going to go work on that like 2-year plus. We're going to put your video on Xboxes and stuff like that. Like
it's the 80-20 rule, right?
Yeah. Good stuff. Hey, so I wanted to talk to tools, but just because I needed to talk about the spreadsheet, I closed my eyes and I still see it.
I know. I have this very vivid memory of being in the meeting. I was on can't remember which floor it was in the 55 Cambridge Parkway.
Fifth floor, I believe. Fifth floor.
Yeah, was it fifth floor? Yeah, just going in there and just
eighth floor. Fifth was
looking at all the people in the room and just like. And sitting there for an hour going through every single one of it. Like, it was like me and you and Renee and Diane and Jack and then people from product and people from engineering and people, it's just
resource Tetris.
So,
exactly.
Yeah. So the spreadsheet that Jeff's referring to is how we used to. There's two of them. There's one is our infamous staffing spreadsheet.
Yeah.
But the one he's referring to here is around addressing any kind of outstanding complaints, right? Is that which one were you talking about?
Both of them, because I do feel like for a while they were tabs on the
I think so. Maybe you're right. Yeah, because we had to go. Yeah, I think you're right, because we used to color anyway. So
yeah, the color coding, exactly.
Oh, this one's for traveling, and this one I can't. And here I am on PTO. So we had this big spreadsheet, and it was fine when we were probably 25 and 30, and then when we started to get to 50, that just. But we literally, schedule people's days because. 5 days in the week, and there's also like I think you said a tab on it that was all the sort of outstanding issues and the impacts that it would have. And this is this massive spreadsheet that we literally get a room of probably 15 or 18 people together and talk about it for a good hour every single week. And it was remarkable. But I think we went through a couple different versions of it, and when we finally put that one to bed, I think there was some joy.
And
joy.
It's funny going back now and looking at it in retrospect. Well, first of all, there's a lot of us, that's our first hypergrowth company, right? And so you think everything's broken all the time, but like you go back and look at it, like for a small company just trying to get like 100% referenceability, that's probably the right move. It's an expensive meeting, but we did what we had to do, and we were kind of in a place where we needed to get the leaders of all these different groups. I didn't feel like there were like, what's that guy doing here? Like everybody was kind of necessary. So, but then,
in fact, it was.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just gonna say it was remarkable that everybody was engaged as they were, right? So, because we were talking about customer problems that had, support on the front end, potentially services who had either built it or are still engaged with them. Engineering, and so there was a lot of discussion and focus, and we'd even do some prioritization in that meeting. And you're right, I think it was an expensive one, but I think it was very effective.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm trying to think, we retired that. Did we go right into NetSuite at that point in time, or?
It wasn't.
I feel like Kristen
Open Air.
What's that?
Kristen Villa, right? Open Air, right? And then they got bought by NetSuite.
Okay.
But we did that. We put that in. That was another thing that
we did that thing, right?
The velocity of what we were able to accomplish on that team that you talked about, that sort of CS ops team, which was me and you and Niall, and I think Ann was on that team. And the stuff we were able to accomplish was great, because we were literally enabling the lines of business ahead of us to be productive, and that being able to focus on, for example, that open air, I think that's what it's called.
Yeah, it was open air, absolutely.
Yeah, we got it done in, I don't know, 2 months, less than 2 months. We got it done really fast. Usually they take 3 to 6, and it worked out well for us. So
yeah, no, it was great stuff. So I'm trying to think here. One of the things we didn't cover the whole. I feel like it's going backwards in history if we go into the whole sales team, opposing PS as revenue drivers and things like that. But I did now just bring it up again. So Are you bumping into that now, or what's your sort of standard strategy on this concept as we know it in the when you're working for a product company that needs services?
Yeah, so I think I had a very interesting experience at Applause with that, in that sales owns a number, right? So everything. So what made that a challenge was not so much that, so the interesting thing is that we got a lot of credit for building strong relationships with customers. Mm-hmm. And then we'd help identify upsell, cross-sell opportunities, feed them into the sales team, they go and close them. And I think once that started to happen, we were clearly seen as the partners. I don't think we got a ton of credit from it for it, but it is what it is. And what's happened recently is they just reorged, and the folks that are responsible for the basically the account management side of things, we call them solution delivery managers, mm-hmm. now report into sales. So they've sort of absorbed them into that group now. So I think it really depends on who owns the number. Are they split? Yep. Are they not? Does sales have a hunting number, and then does another organization have a farming number? Yep. And I think in many ways, as you know, right, building those relationships, improving your ability to partner with them goes a long way to help eliminate that idea on the sales side that service is in the way or slows things down. When I went to Applause, the first 2 years I had the SEs, so I had SEs in addition to the delivery function, and mm-hmm. that was tremendous because we could really handle the requirements, and I kept them accountable because they'd have to be, they're accountable to me, which then, my team would have to go deliver on the customer side. So that worked out tremendously well. But, one of the things I had to sign up for, which was a under 24-hour SLA on any request coming in, right?
Oh, because, like sales requests, like, can you turn around? Okay, yeah.
Yep, I need to stay in work. I need to hop on this call. I need to go somewhere. And so our commitment, right, in order to reassure the sales team that we weren't in the way, was to commit to a 24-hour turnaround or less. And, typically we beat it, but those are the kind of things you have to, and I don't blame them. They should be asking for that kind of piece to it, because
they're getting pressure. Yeah, absolutely.
Of course. Yeah. And it's good for the company, right? The earlier in the cycle you close the deal, the more revenue you get in the SaaS model. So that becomes important. So I think it's just a balance. A lot has to do with the folks and the responsibility, and then who has the numbers.
Yeah. So at Brightcove, one reason, I mean, of course, I'd say relationships and everything like that, but they were incentivized on services deals.
Yep.
Because we didn't have a quota as sales for sales things in PS leadership. We just had a sort of P&L number that we had to hit. So there was no commissions to be had. So I was basically saying, like, let them take the commissions on these deals. And so they were giving them some pretty high percentage points on them. I can't remember. And then they would do spiffs with certain different numbers and things like that for services. But what wound up happening is that G. Gooder, second time mentioning him here, he was always just killing it on his number. And first of all, he was like just an amazing sales guy. But second of all, he always brought in services, and those would be the things that tipped his number over to like President's Club stuff, because every deal had an extra 100 to 300K added into it with services, or we would do it right where we'd sell a little discovery just so we can get the deal closed, and then then turns into an annuity for him. So, but I think that if they get the number, I mean, or they're certainly getting good points on it, because if it's too low, they're just going to be like, oh, forget this. But, sales guys are driven by money, right? And if they're getting quota relief based on selling professional services, you remembered they were like, hey, it's getting low in the quarter. Can you sell these guys an audit? Can you guys sell them this or that? Like, go in there and be consultants and things like that. They start telling you what we needed for packages.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the incentive piece is one huge component to that. Yeah. Like, remember, I don't know if you remember, but we, Sunil, I haven't thought about him in a while, but Sunil used to, keep us on the outskirts all the time. And since I was running the East, I was closely aligned with him, and I wanted to try to build that relationship with him. Like, listen, the other component of this that we can do, especially in a technical solution like Endeca, which is we can sit there and look them in the eye and tell them that we've done that. We've been there, we've done it successfully for customers, and we have that credibility. So selling something like that, we actually can help you close the deal.
Absolutely.
So that was one thing I felt like I call them enlightened sales guys. The enlightened ones get that.
Yeah.
and know that we can help them really move the needle when it comes to that. But then it really becomes around incentive models. And so, previously, I think that the Endeca sales team was being comped in a particular way, and Steve recognized some of the impact of that, and he went and changed it. And literally that next day, Sunil comes into my office and say, "Hey, Mark, I'd like to sit down with you and work through this proposal." I was like, "All right, this is fantastic." And yeah, people do what they're incented to do. So I guess that's another component to sales and services partnerships is how are the sales guys incented, because they are going to do what they're intended to do.
And I'd recommend what you just said, not just for professional services, but also SaaS-based implementation, consulting, all of those things, account management, because basically, listen, I sell stuff now. Like it's what you're dealing with when you're dealing with a salesperson. People think they're going to go like run away. How does this actually, what's the story here about how I become successful once I sign the deal? And if you bring those people in, it's just a different conversation. And it's like, this is what I do every day. I make people like you successful. And that changes it from like, yeah, you guys will be fine. Yeah. It's game changer. So. Yeah.
And I think so one of the really interesting things about Applause was, SaaS company, yes, but there were no competition, right? We literally had no competition, because we were defining this category. And so, it's not a feature function cost kind of sale, right? You don't get in there, and we literally stopped doing demos because nobody cared. All they really cared about was the results. But the only way to sell it then was to sell through storytelling, right? And so the best guys that we had were the ones that had, the 5, 6, 8, 10 stories in their back pocket that, ask the right questions and then tell the related story back to the customer to tell them how we had done this for somebody else. And I call this a light bulb moment. That gets you a lot closer to that light bulb going off over their head saying, oh, here's how crowdsourced testing can help me in the context of my organization. Once you get that light bulb moment, then it's just a matter of money, right? You just need to get to the right dollar amount based on budgets and everything else. But once they see the opportunity, that was just a tremendous transition for them, that paradigm shift. But they had to get to that light bulb moment. The only way you got there was through storytelling.
No, absolutely. And that's probably a great way to stop the work stuff here and just, I know you run to a meeting in 5 minutes. So what are you doing now that's fun? Because you were always traveling places that I know my kids would like kill me if I brought them and stuff like that. So
come on, they'd love it. So
maybe now at their age, maybe.
Yeah. My boys are now they're 15 and 13. Last year we went to Vienna. So I spent a semester in college there. I also got engaged there to my wife. So it has a lot of meaning for me. So I brought my boys there, and my son literally, was it last month, said, "Hey Dad, when can we go back to Vienna?" Right? He had a tremendous experience. Vienna is just a gorgeous and beautiful city. We spent an entire week there. We Airbnb'd it. We tried not to overprogram it and just really enjoyed ourselves. And it was an indelible memory for them. A couple years ago, we did a 2-week tour out into the western part of the country where
that was awesome. Yeah. Like a special camper for it? Or?
No, we did it in a car, but I'll tell you about that last day in a sec. So it turns out that the national parks, it was the 100th year anniversary. And so it turned out all 4th graders and their families were allowed free access to any of the national parks in the year. And so I had a 4th grader. So I'd always want to go to Glacier National Park before the glaciers melted, although they're pretty close to melted already. Yeah. And so we planned this trip. We basically 2 weeks in the summer, we flew into Salt Lake, then we drove about 2,000 miles up through Idaho and Utah and Wyoming and Montana, and came back around. And it was just an unbelievably great trip. Stopped in Jackson, we went to Yosemite. Glacier was amazing. But the last night, my wife planned for us to go to a true glamping kind of place. It's called Conestoga something. And the old Conestoga wagons that they used to travel, west in the 1800s, they turned them into like down comforter beds. And, you had a fire concierge. So if you wanted to put a fire on, you called them and they'd come and build a fire in front of your place. It was pretty classic. So that was a pretty nice place.
You're busy with your scarf, so you can't.
Yeah, right. The only problem was it was in Utah and I couldn't find any beer. So,
Oh, yes.
No, we love to travel. Travel to me is one of those tremendously liberating and wonderful things. Opens you up to new experiences and different ways of thinking about things. And I think in many ways, from a professional perspective, also helps you become more creative, right? Because you start to think differently and your experiences are different. And I find it very, very entertaining and in many ways rejuvenating.
100%. Anytime you're taken out of your, like, this is my comfort zone, right? And, unfortunately, that's what we do. We just we got this big trip in San Diego to see my wife's sister. And it's like, we're just basically transporting our home to San Diego for 2 weeks. There's nothing crazy about that. Like, we're just like, here's our house over there for, Airbnb.
Yep.
But doing that and the driving and what are we going to do? And no, that's amazing. And I think my girls are finally hitting that age soon where we can start doing a little bit more of that without having to, make sure the iPads are charged for 15 hours and stuff. So
yeah, I mean, we had an interesting thing around the iPads was, we were afraid because if you get out and do if you get out into the western part of the country, especially if you're from the East Coast, it's such a just amazing place. It's so big. And I literally thought I would be bored out of my mind driving, 4 or 5 hours at a time. Yeah. And I just literally look out the window and watch the mountains go by. It was amazing. But we put in a rule that said you can only use your iPad for 2 hours at a time in the car. And then the other 2 hours you need to read or what have you.
Yep.
What worked out remarkably well was books on tape or, whatever, books on CD or books on MP3, where we were, we went through a couple, 3 books, but they were totally riveted and they got a chance to pick their heads up out of the device and look out the window and see.
That's a great idea. Like throw some Harry Potter on or something, but whatever. Yep. It's something that would hit all 3 of them. Like they love the Jocko, like the Uncle Jocko podcast that's out there now.
Is that okay for children?
Oh no, not the general one. He's got another one that's in the persona of his.
The one that wrote the book.
He's got the child, Uncle Jake.
Right, yeah.
So it's I'm like struggling with my phone. This is great podcast material, but it's called the Warrior Kid Podcast.
Yep.
And I swear to God, it's like all the stuff that you try and say to your kids that they just kind of hand wave to you. But like even my oldest, the 13-year-old, she listens to it and finds it interesting. So it's on like once a month in my truck. So it's
cool.
But hey, listen, I know you got to run. This was great. We got to make sure we try and schedule a lunch, and I'll run out there. But I'll stop the recording and I'll let you get to your next meeting. And this was awesome. And I loved going over all these things because I've been dying to talk to an expert about some of these things. So
well thanks. I enjoyed it a lot. Thanks a lot for putting this together. I listened to the other ones going through, and it was definitely parts of the trips down memory lane, and learning something in every one of them. So it's
and everybody's got a different situation, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just how you apply, the best practices and stuff. So it's great.
Very cool.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, Jeff.
Talk to you soon. Okay.
All right. Bye.